I seek refuge in Allah from the accursed Satan. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful.
Today we will read some sections from the treatise on resurrection, Hashir RİSALE-İ. We will read very beautiful, very valuable passages, God willing. May God Almighty grant us the ability to benefit and be enlightened, God willing.
The 10th word. Now there is a paragraph from the introduction of the 10th word regarding its method of explanation and proof. Each truth proves three things at once. As you know, if we recall, how many truths are there in the 10th word? There are 12 truths, right? It proves the resurrection with 12 truths. Within each truth, it proves three things at once. We will read the 9th one today, God willing. But before that, some passages, it proves three things at once. It proves both the existence of the necessary being, Wajib al-Wujud, and his names and attributes, and then it builds the proof of the resurrection upon them. For example, when reading the 9th truth, it first proves that Allah exists and that his existence is necessary. Then it explains and proves 2 or 4 of the names that Allah possesses, according to the topic. Then it builds the resurrection upon those names. There are 3 levels. First, it makes you look at the universe. It shows the actions that emerge through the manifestation of those names in the universe. Allah's actions. From those actions, it proves that He is the doer, Allah's existence. And from the reality of the ownership of those actions, it proves Allah's names by showing which names are being manifested. Then it shows that those proofs and those names necessitate the hereafter, that those names will also be manifested in the hereafter, and that their manifestation necessitates the creation of the hereafter. It's like going from the world to Allah's names, and from Allah's names again to the hereafter. The style of proof follows this path. From the most stubborn denier to the most sincere believer. Of course, since it proves the existence of Allah, they also become addressees. For example, if it started with Allah's names without proving His existence, then the deniers would not be addressees. But since it also proves the existence of Allah, its words also address them. From the most stubborn denier to the most sincere believer, everyone can take his share from every truth, because in the truths, it turns the gaze to the beings, to the works of art. It says, in these, there are orderly actions. An orderly action cannot be without a doer. In the revolution of the sun, the revolution of the earth, the coming of spring, the creation of trees, that is, in all of Allah's actions in the universe, there is order and harmony. There are customs, laws that Allah has determined. All actions occur based on those laws. There is nothing random, nothing coincidental. In how much time a child will be created in the mother's womb, how a tree will grow. For example, the order and harmony in the science of agriculture, geology, the order and harmony underground, astronomy, astrology, and so on. Hundreds of sciences delve into each realm of the universe, observe the disposals of God Almighty in that realm, and reveal the order and harmony there. That is, what is there in all of the actions? Order and harmony. Then there is a doer who performs these actions. And because there is order, it shows that Allah is the all-wise, Hakim. In these there are orderly actions. An orderly action cannot be without a doer. Therefore there is a doer who performs those actions. Since that doer works with order and balance, He must be all-wise and all-just. Since he is all-wise, he does not do absurd things. Since he works with justice, he does not let rights be wasted. Therefore, there will be a great gathering, a supreme court. This is just a small example. He explains this extensively in the third truth. We read it just as an example to show the transition from the universe to actions, from actions to names, and from there to the hereafter, to show the truth and the example. The style, the truths have set about their work in this style. Because it is concise, it proves three cases at once. A superficial gaze cannot perceive it. In any case, each of those concise truths has been detailed with perfect explanation by other treatises and words. Yes. O brother who contemplates this treatise with fairness, do not say, "Why can't I understand this 10th word all at once?" And do not be distressed because you do not fully understand. Why? Because even a genius of philosophy like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, Ibn Sina's books were taught in Europe for 600 years. His medical books, right? Such a genius. Even that person said what? He said resurrection is not based on rational principles. He meant we believe in it, but the intellect cannot go on this path. And also, all the Islamic scholars have unanimously decreed that resurrection is a matter of transmission. Its proof is transmitted. That is, what did all the Islamic scholars say about the matter of resurrection? The existence of the hereafter, the existence of paradise, the existence of hell, these are matters of transmission. Transmission means it came to our Prophet through the verses in the Quran. It came to us from our Prophet. There is transmission there. That is because it is mentioned in the Quran. Its proof is its being in the Quran. They said it cannot be proven with reason. Look, Ibn Sina plus all the Islamic scholars decreed that resurrection is a matter of transmission. Its proof is transmitted. For example, does the hereafter exist? Yes. Will there be paradise and hell? Yes. What is the proof? The proof is transmitted. They said there are verses in the Quran. They unanimously decreed that one cannot reach it with the intellect. This means that the explanation and proof of the existence of the hereafter are being done for the first time in the RİSALE-İ Nur, right? Certainly, such a deep and spiritually very lofty path cannot suddenly become a public highway of the intellect. For example, it's easy to look at a tree and understand the existence of Allah from the tree, right? And art, like a tree, is an amazing thing. The fruits that come from the tree, the oranges, the apples, how will they come out? It points to a creator. But to understand that there will be an eternal realm after this world is more difficult, right? How will you understand it? But what does the RİSALE-İ Nur do? It says, you see the orange. This shows that Allah is the all-merciful, Rahim. It shows that He is the all-compassionate, Rahman, the all-generous, Kareem. Since Allah is infinitely compassionate and merciful, the generosity of one who is infinitely compassionate and merciful cannot be confined to this world alone. It must be infinite. This world is limited. Then this compassion must continue in an unlimited life, it says. What happened? It makes you look from the perspective of Allah's name, the All-Merciful. Therefore, it becomes an explanation that everyone can understand. That's why it cannot be a public highway of the intellect, but with this kind of explanation, it can be generalized. With the grace of the all-wise Quran, when I say rational, if I call this rational, then everyone can understand it this way. Is there anything wrong with that? But Allah has granted this style, this path to the Master and to the people in this age. And we should give 1,000 thanks that with the grace of the all-wise Quran and the mercy of the merciful Creator, He has bestowed that deep and lofty path to such a degree in this age where imitation is broken and submission is spoiled. For example, it is asked, what does imitation is broken mean? Right? What does imitation is broken mean? There is imitative faith, taklidi iman, and realized faith, takiki iman. For instance, in the past, our grandfathers, our grandmothers, the older generations, they believed, but most of it was imitative faith. Everyone believes that way. The majority believes. In society, without looking too much at the evidence, everyone believes by imitation, relying on the great personages, their elders, etc., right? Imitative faith. But believing by understanding its proof, its evidence, its truths becomes realized faith. In this age, imitative faiths are being broken. Why? When a person sees an atheist, an irreligious person, and what not around him, and then hears such cunning arguments, those can also come to the minds of the youth and confuse them, right? Imitation can be broken. In the past, encountering an irreligious person was perhaps impossible. Now a child goes on the internet, goes here, goes there, and sees that there are many irreligious people and so on. And he starts to say, I wonder. If he gets a little caught up in them, his imitation can be broken immediately. That is why in this age, realized faith is truly essential. If you want to preserve your faith, if you want it to remain like a solid rock, you need to read and understand its proofs, which are as numerous as the universe, and place them in your heart so that you can protect your faith. We should give 1,000 thanks that He has bestowed that deep and lofty path to such a degree in this age, where imitation is broken and submission is spoiled. God has bestowed such a book. You read it, and you begin to see the hereafter as if you see the world, of course, through the path of faith. That is why we should give 1,000 thanks, even if it is a bit difficult to understand. What is the way to understand the RİSALE-İ Nur? To read it by restudying it again and again, because it is sufficient for the salvation of our faith. It is sufficient for the salvation of our faith. We should be content with the amount we have understood and strive to increase it by restudying it. He is telling us the path to follow when reading the RİSALE. For example, you read the treatise on resurrection, or we read this lesson now, the ninth truth. There will be an amount that we have understood, right? We will understand. To a degree, to a level. Then what will we do? By restudying it. What does restudy, tekrar mutala, mean? You will go back to the beginning. You will restudy it. Then you will go back to the beginning. You will restudy it again. In every study, for example, you enter the garden, right, brother? As you go through the garden, you pick the fruits. Can you pick them all? You will go back to the beginning. You will go through it again. You will pick again. You will constantly pick. This will not end in a lifetime. In the places you have picked, God Almighty will create new fruits. In that way, we should strive for its increase, that is, for our benefit to increase. In fact, as one restudies it again and again, when one sees that understanding increase, what occurs in the person? Something new occurs. Okay, you say? I've found the formula. Let me read it again. Let me benefit again. Let me read it again. It even becomes more enjoyable. You become very familiar with the subject and you advance mentally and intellectually. One secret of why the hereafter cannot be reached with the intellect alone is this. Since the great resurrection occurs with the manifestation of the greatest name, the great resurrection is proven as easily as spring, and a definite conviction and realized faith are attained by seeing and showing the great actions that appear with the manifestation of the greatest name of God Almighty and the manifestation of every name in its greatest degree. Yes, this sentence really explains the great resurrection. What was the great resurrection? The great resurrection is the plane of gathering. The plane of gathering. All people die. The last day happens, then God Almighty, what we call the plane of gathering, the inside of the circle that the earth draws as it revolves around the sun, that whole area becomes the plane of gathering. From the prophet Adam until the last day, 500 billion, 600 billion, however many billion people have lived, he creates their corpses, their bodies, in that plane in a time as short as the blink of an eye. He places their souls, gives them life. In a very short time, that great resurrection happens, the second creation in an instant. There, the manifestation of power is at its maximum. So many people at once, the power is manifested to the maximum. Life is given to all of them at once. The name Muhyi, the giver of life, is the greatest name. The name Hay, the ever-living, is the greatest name. The name Hay manifests, it gives life, right? That great activity, the creatorship, a great creation. That is the great resurrection. It happens with the manifestation of the greatest name. And it happens with the manifestation of every name in its greatest degree. Many names are manifested, but they are manifested at the greatest degree. For example, in a flower, it doesn't manifest at the greatest degree, but in a spring, it does manifest at the greatest degree. In the plane of gathering, even more so. Since the great resurrection occurs with the manifestation of the greatest name and with the manifestation of the greatest name of God Almighty, and every name in its greatest degree, the great resurrection is proven as easily as spring, and a definite conviction and realized faith are attained by seeing and showing the great actions, that is, the great act of creation, that appear. For instance, let's think of the earth. Let's think of spring after winter. When you see thousands, millions, trillions of living things, trees, grasses, etc., being created, being resurrected, all at once on the face of the earth, you say, okay, the power that created these can also create the same thing there. Since it can do this, it can also do that. What happens? In that great action, you can see the manifestation of the same name there. Then what happens? It is proven easily, and a definite conviction and realized faith are attained. In this 10th word, with the grace of the Quran, it is seen and shown in this way. Otherwise, if the intellect were left on its own with its narrow and small principles, it would remain incapable. It would be forced to imitate. In other words, with other methods, with rational methods, this cannot be figured out. If it could have been, who would have done it? Ibn Sina would have. This means this is the method. This is the method of the Quran. Yes. Let's continue now from the 10th word. Just as we saw in 12 ways in the story, that it is in no way possible for such a king to have such a temporary guest house-like country and not to have another permanent country that is the source of his stability and splendor and the pivot of his supreme sovereignty. so too, it is in no way possible for the eternal creator of this transient world to invent this and not to invent an eternal world. Now, isn't Allah eternal? So if the world is transient, can that be? The realm of the eternal creator must also be eternal. Then is it possible for the eternal creator of this transient world to invent this and not to invent an eternal world? Also, it is not possible for the eternal maker of this wondrous and fleeting universe. Wondrous, bedi, and fleeting, zail. What does bedi mean? Uniquely beautiful. Bedi, you know there is Bediüzzaman, the wonder of the age, unique, without a peer. In terms of knowledge, Bedi, one who has no equal. That is, this universe has been created with very wondrous art, but it is fleeting. It is created so marvelously, but it goes to annihilation. For the eternal maker of this wondrous and fleeting universe to create this, and not to invent another stable and permanent universe. Also, it is not possible for the wise, powerful, and merciful originator of this world, which has the ruling of being a place of exhibition, a field of trial, and a field for cultivation. What is this world's ruling? It has the ruling of being a place of exhibition, measure. What is a place of exhibition? A place of display. A place of display is a place of exhibition. The artist exhibits his arts to us, a place of exhibition, and a field of trial, meydana imtihan. He tests what we understand and what we don't. He gives grades accordingly. And with the ruling of a field for cultivation, tarla, you sow the field. Is the field sown in autumn? You harvest in the spring, right? You sow one, you get 10. With the ruling of a field, everything we sow in this world will be given to us in the next, right? With the ruling of a field. But 1 for 10, 1 for 100, 1 for 1,000. For the wise, powerful, and merciful originator of this world, which has the ruling of being a field for cultivation, to create it and not to create the abode of the hereafter, which is the locus of all its purposes. For example, he tests, gives a grade, but then doesn't treat accordingly. Can that be? He sows and plants a field. That is, he gives it to us with the ruling of a field we sow and plant, but he doesn't give us the results. Can that be? It cannot. Then it is not possible for him to create it and not to create the abode of the hereafter, which is the locus of all its purposes. This truth is entered through 12 doors. This truth he mentions is the truth of the hereafter, right? It is entered through 12 doors. Those doors are opened with 12 truths.